Could we have asked for a better venue to hear a bunch of techies rattle off acronyms?
WTF? FFS.
But seriously, we're here today to have a really important conversation about generative AI and the creative community. Gen AI is transforming nearly every industry on Earth, including the entertainment and advertising industries. And today what we're going to do is a deep dive on how Gen AI is empowering creatives. What we hope you walk away from this session with is a better understanding of how both of these industries are embracing these new technologies, but also how to apply them responsibly, ethically, and most importantly, empathetically to the most important resource of the creative community, the creatives themselves. So let's start at the top. How do both of you define generative AI, and more importantly, how do you discuss it with your teams?
So I guess you could talk about like what it does, which is generates new work. Effectively, it could be text, that could be images, video, objects, sound, speech, and that's kind of the what. It's based on foundational models like large language models, diffusion models. That would be like text to image. That's the kind of the how. But in terms of talking to the teams, you have to kind of put it in context of what they're going to do in their day jobs, basically, you know, as a tool. But it's not like any tool that they've really had before. And I'm going to do a little demo. Sorry, I've got a gadget. I like a live demo because it's the best thing you can do on stage. It never goes wrong. So hopefully you might be able to see this dude on camera. And if you can zoom in on this guy. Here he is. Oh, he's just waking up. Hello. There he is. So this is my little friend Tengu. So you can see we've got like a deep learning speech recognition module in here and a lip synthesis module going. Well, I'd like to tell you that's what's going on, but it's actually just a microphone and some flashing lights. But he's got like a little bit of character, hasn't he? And he's pretty funny if you have him next to the speaker in your video conferences, because your colleagues are saying something super insightful, but he's just like, blah, blah, blah. And the reason I'm showing you this dude is because I've gendered him. That was dangerous, but I'm going to go with it anyway. The reason I'm showing you this little Japanese toy is that it's quite easy to give him attributes. It's quite easy to say, well, he's kind of sarcastic and he's funny. But at the end of the day, you know that he's a little plastic toy. The challenge with generative AI is that it has characteristics that make it seem human-like, and it does things that we do, and it does it in a way that are so close to what we perceive as being the way a human would do things, that it's easy to forget that it's not. You're not going to forget that this dude is not human, even though he has human-like attributes. But with Gen AI, I think I always want our teams to understand that it's a mimic, like that's a mimic. It mimics what we would do, but it's not perfect and it's not us. So you can't let yourself fall into the trap of expecting it to make the decisions you would make. And I think that's really important for teams when they're using these tools.
Yeah, and I mean, just building on that, I think when we're looking in from an advertising perspective, actually, it's quite a broad spectrum when you think about generative AI, because not only is it the origination of imagery and copy and the likes of that, but actually it's the long tail of production that then follows with that. So it's the adaptation, the versioning, the translations, etc., which this we believe will also aid us as we look at how we incorporate that in our business. And actually, so the way we talk about it with our teams is we talk about it as a continuum. And at one end of the spectrum, it's going to augment the creative process. And what we mean by that is actually it's going to give us tools, ways of thinking, ways of creating new ideas for clients that might never have been possible, even been thought about before. A recent example which we use to make the point is work done with Serena Williams for Nike, where the idea was to get her to play her younger self. It's kind of a crazy idea, but it's brilliant, and it's only one that can be realized when you have these kind of tools at your fingertips. So I think we're going to see an opportunity come with us where having that facility around us really empowers us to get to better creative and interesting, innovative creative ideas. And then the other end of that spectrum is really about how it can accelerate automation and help us deliver work against that. And it's a massive unlock for us as we look at things like addressable media. So how do we personalize work? How do we get work that is actually much more relevant for consumers? And we know that consumers are demanding this. They don't want generic advertising messages. They are demanding stuff to be far more personal. And suddenly, these tools allow us to actually leverage that across the media landscape where we'll be doing this. And being able to do it dynamically, being able to do it in real time, being able to take signals which influence the way in which we create the work is going to be incredibly important.
So I think as well as looking at how we use the tools, you have to think about how you're deploying that into a way that is kind of low friction for your teams as well. So yeah, we use it everywhere actually in our processes already. And actually you probably, this is an educated audience, we're using it in our everyday lives already everywhere. It's about how you deploy that in a useful way that actually helps you augment the process, get quicker, get more creative. And it is a creative tool, but it doesn't replace the creative process. I think that's really important to discuss because, we're using it to get quicker at things, but not to usurp the great minds that come up with the content that, we love.
Like the ideation process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good one because with, pictures always speak better than words. And so if you can depict what you're trying to do from a creative point of view, and again, like when you're in film and TV, everything's about preserving the creative vision. Like we talk about that all the time. How do we get what's in the director's mind on screen in front of the audience? And being able to communicate that visually and also being able to preserve the elements of that creative intent through the whole chain because they get lost, things get thrown away. A friend of mine actually always reminds me that whenever you're on a film set and someone shouts, "It's a wrap," everyone on that set thinks that's it, the movie's done. Because for them it is. Like the actors are done, they go on their next show, the lighting people, the camera people. And a lot of the information at that stage is lost. And actually generative AI is helping us preserve that through the chain. Because for everybody else involved in the film process, it's just starting. And so getting that data to flow across and that creative intent to be communicated across is really important. And actually we're finding Gen AI come to the fore in helping us do that.
Yeah, and we see that in our world where the ability to storyboard, to create animatics through the use of generative AI is a real accelerant to the discussions you're having. You can actually get the same film running in the heads of your clients, and that's incredibly important. And it also allows us then to take that those kind of concepts, not just like a dry script, but actually with visual and which contains things like mood and tone and those softer elements, allows us also to pre-test that with consumers and get a much better feedback from it. But it's speeding that whole process up.
What?
So,
What?
no, it's like a new communication tool to be able to move through the process.
It is, and that's kind of taking some learning because, we have to get, again, you've got all these roles in TV, film production, and in any creative process where, the script has to be developed and the director then communicates that to the director of photography, the colorist, the visual effects team, and then that goes on into post-production and then on to distribution and things like localization. And again, learning how to use these tools to help communicate through those processes and actually enhance all of them is really important, but it is a learning process like anything else. It's a bigger step up than any other tool we've had before, But at the end of the day, you know, the teams can start to learn how to use them and use them to make their day easier and make their output better.
One of my favorite examples I've seen is one of the tools on Runway, where you can actually do color correction. You can take a piece of video, and then the director can use a text prompt to be able to explain how he or she wants it to look, how they want it to feel. And then not only will it generate a reference video, but it will actually be able to output the metadata files necessary to import that into the post-production process. And I think that's a great example of what you were just talking about.
Hands up everyone who knows what a LUT is.
Yay.
There's a couple of you out
Three
there.
people at the front. We were right to keep the acronyms out.
So there's many, many use cases for generative AI, but here we're specifically talking about supporting the creative process. So speaking of use cases, what are you most commonly seeing in both motion picture production and advertising?
I mean, I think from our side, if we break it down into the constituent parts, that gives us clues about, because I think everything's moving at slightly different pace of adoption. So if we look across areas like copy, image generation, and voice as being three examples, I think the copy is by far the most advanced area in it. Clients and our teams are far more comfortable with that as a process, but it's allowing us to also do other areas of the business. So talk about the automation piece of it, allows us to do things like subtitling and audio descriptions directly into and onto the content. So actually it speeds up and takes away some of the tedious natures of the work that we have to do. And then if we look at kind of image generation, I think this is the area where we're seeing people most enthusiastically running at this and exploring about the way in which it might, the application that might be right for their brand or their particular use case on it. And it might not be as prevalent as we might expect it to be, but we're starting to see this beginning to emerge. So if I use the example of some work we did with Coca-Cola, where actually we're taking their digital twins and we're creating hyperlocal, relevant food content imagery through AI and putting those elements together, allows them to actually now generate imagery, push it out into across 100 plus or so markets, and getting it so it becomes very, very relevant at pace and at scale. So a real kind of live example of how clients are doing this. We see lots of exploration in this space at the moment. So it's an exciting time there. And then when we look at areas like voice, I think voice has, it's been promising a lot, the AI voice, for last few years, but it feels like we're just on that tipping point now where it's actually going to move from where it is into a much more kind of mainstream communication tool with it in advertising, being used across areas like broadcast as well as things like audio description, which it's already being used in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big use case in film and television, audio description. I mean, we've been doing that for a long time, and obviously that's an accessibility tool as well as captioning for hearing impaired people, and then audio description for visually impaired. And what we're seeing is that actually that's one where voice synthesis is very good now. It's actually ripe for that particular use case. And that opens up accessibility to tiers of content that wouldn't otherwise be, wouldn't have that opportunity to have it, because just cost, honestly. There's so much content out there. But for a lot of the content aggregators, streamers, and the big studios, they want to not only have their content localized, and again, that's another area we use it a lot, but they also want to make it accessible. So audio description right now, because it doesn't have quite the peaks and troughs of emotional delivery that you might find in the actual like performance dialogue, it's a really good use case. And there was some, I mean, this used everywhere. It's pretty interesting. Some of the edge case stuff I like it's used for assessing scripts to see, are they diverse in their, delivery and the characters and so on, and will they sell? And will they sell in certain territories as well, not just to sort of a, let's call it a mainstream kind of Western audience? Will they sell into other geographies? So that's a really interesting one. I don't know if anyone's writing scripts. I'd be a little bit like, oh no, it's an AI. It's a bit like an AI assessing your CV, but it's proving itself. And film financing companies obviously need tools to help them be successful, and that's a great one. And then, image, video definitely is interesting. I think realistically for the really high-end Hollywood stuff, it's not quite where we want it to be for our biggest tentpole movies and shows. But again, if you look at well, actually, interestingly, sorry, I'm going to go off down a garden path here. So DARPA, the Defense and Research Agency, the US Military Research Agency, DARPA, did a bit of a look into deepfakes recently, and they published a report. You can go and have a look. It's all public information. And they assessed technology and adversary readiness for deepfakes. And they start with shallow fakes, which is taking a real picture or video and then giving it to an audience out of context. So you redress the context of that, which we see all the time being used by politicians, particularly in certain countries that have got elections coming up. And that's standard. They call that shallow fake, and then deep fake is only just above that. And those tools are readily available to basically bedroom bandits, kids can do that, anyone. Right at the top of the adversary and technical capability list on that big graph that they draw is what they call there's nation state, and you can guess nation states. They call near peer adversaries. So those are the big nation states. So just think superpowers. And then Hollywood. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So they put Hollywood right up there because Hollywood have the best technical capability and reach to create things that aren't real but make you think that they are. And that's way above tools that you can just use for deepfakes. So I think that gives you a sense of the kind of scale and quality level that we're expecting. But those tools can be really useful for a couple of things. One is like stock footage, that kind of thing. And the other one is to open up opportunities for low and no budget filmmakers to actually express their creative intent. Again, you have a great example of this because you've done it.
We did. So every year my team produces a short piece of content, typically to do a technology demonstration about bleeding edge workflows. And this year what we wanted to do was take on something so insanely ambitious that we wouldn't be able to do it without all these new tools. And we wanted to come up with something that's super high concept, and I was joking around and I said something like Cowgirls on the Moon. But nobody came up with a better idea, so we rolled with it and we actually produced a faux 70s B movie trailer. But what we wanted to do was incorporate all of these Gen AI tools throughout the process. So we used Runway to generate storyboards and to generate concept art. We also used it to generate graphics assets that we used on, for instance, a spray can. You can go and watch it on YouTube. It's strange and it's weird. I warn you in advance. So then we also used Kubrick, which is a really interesting company that is using generative AI to create virtual backdrops on virtual production sets, which is a new form of production where there's a giant LED wall behind the performers, and it really allows you to be anywhere and turn those scenes over very, very quickly. We used Adobe. Actually, funny story, one of our microphones died in the middle of production, and so we had to shoot with the onboard camera mic, which sounds terrible. And using Adobe's enhanced speech tool, we were able to completely rebuild that audio track from scratch. And then one of my colleagues needed to do a presentation. He's Brazilian, in Portuguese. The film was in English. We were able to generate a Portuguese language version in about 10 minutes flat. And the result was that we were able to produce a short film with 36 VFX heavy shots with 7 people in 7 days. I mean...
Yeah, except instead of 600 people in 6 months, which is normally what happens on movies in several companies. If you've ever wondered why the credit roll is so long at the end of films, it's the VFX. But it's hard work. And actually, that's another interesting point. If you, people, I'm going to do another hands up. I can barely see you, but I'm going to try it. Has anyone used generative image just for fun? Yeah, quite a lot of you. Right, how many of you think you could knock out a Hollywood movie in an afternoon? Yeah, exactly. No, and you're right. Yeah, I mean, the challenge with like wholesale, and again, like ideation, storyboarding, that kind of thing is actually super powerful for that. But when you have a very clear vision of what you want in your mind, and most, show runners and directors do, you can't just prompt your way out of that particular challenge. And if you do, you're going to end up spending your whole time doing the traditional VFX process to fix whatever came out of the Gen AI. I mean, and by the way, I was using Luma 1.5, which just came out last week. Also, you guys probably go to a lot of AI talks, but I kind of hate the fact that every time I go on stage and talk about it, whatever I'm saying is already out of date. So I've said Luma 1.5. Someone out there's like, well, they're on Luma 2.0 already, so But that still gets the number of fingers wrong. So generally it's pretty good, but you can still get 6 or 4 or 2. And what's interesting about that is it's not even the AI's fault, because 5 is not the average number of fingers. I don't know if it's like somewhere. I mean, it's the median and the mode, but it's not the mean average of fingers that we have. And we're tolerant, actually, of less fingers generally. Although there is a friend of mine, Kathleen, who's out there somewhere, told me this morning there is actually a famous Bollywood actor who has a second thumb. So he has 6 fingers. Yeah, so I was just like... so AI isn't necessarily wrong when it puts 6 fingers on people, just to be clear about that. But it's very useful. Like you mentioned Adobe, I think this is where it's finding its way very quickly into that high-end film process, because those mainstream tools that the visual effects teams and so on are used to using absolutely have generative AI built in. And if you're doing something like painting a lamppost out of a period drama shot or something, because it's anachronistic, then they're used to that, and it takes the tedium out of that job. Like, you can do it manually, but why would you? It's boring, and you can get on with something much more exciting, like making the flames of a dragon's fire look more like you want them to. That's a terrible example.
That's a great dovetail, because at AWS we're really focused on how we can empower creatives to use generative AI to automate processes that may be outdated, manual, or really take time away from creative ideation. So what use cases do you see that are beneficial, or even the ones that are not quite ready yet or are not a good fit?
So I think AI is going to permeate everything, and it already is. The things which, I suppose the way in which I would look at this is there's 2 observations of where we could best apply it to help our clients. And one of the things is about how do we create, and it builds on what you were saying, Rich, about it not being a mimic, but actually it's starting to become much more creative. And I think one of the areas which we need to explore is how do we create distinctive work on behalf of our clients? And what we mean by that is if we are producing work which is just simply a mimic of the category, that doesn't help give clients a competitive edge. And that's the role of creativity very much in establishing where the brand is, how it's positioned, and also to give it a point of difference. And so I think that's part of the areas which we want to continue to see it exploring the application of how to do that. But in order to do that, what we should be doing is looking at how, therefore, to bring in areas which it can be informed by the brand, how the brand shows up and how it presents itself in order to make it distinctive. But then also other areas which will drive the performance, so an understanding of the audience, and how those, the spectrum of different audiences which you might be talking to, and how that varies in terms of how we produce work and deliver for that. But then, and it carries on, what platforms are we putting against? TikTok's quite different from Instagram if you're producing work in those arenas. So you've got to be able to have that informed by. So I think there's this whole context around actually for delivery of work for clients, and the use cases that we see this is very, very powerful, but it needs to be producing work which is relevant and potent for brands so that they have that, because if they don't have that, you end up spending more money on your media investment, and that's actually is an order of magnitude more than the production is.
Yeah, I think there's a few areas that we're seeing it really prevalent, and it's really in front of you on screen. Like voice mimicking is one really good example of that. You know, we've famously seen James Earl Jones sign the rights over to his voice so that, you know, the mighty Sith Lord Darth Vader, so I'm sorry, I'm a Sith fan, you might, yeah, you can still hear him in the future. Sorry, I've said too much. I can speak Sith. Do you speak any other?
I
like, film
don't, but I
languages?
did a Lord of the Rings presentation and spoke Elvish a couple of years ago.
I think we've said too much anyway. But you know, I mean, like, these things are out there, and they sometimes, yeah, they're right in front of you. And again, it's like we can enable these really high-end creative processes to do things that we couldn't do before. You have to be very careful with the tools, not to, for instance, fall into the uncanny valley. Again, you know, they can be weird sometimes. They're not very good at movement, actually. It's one of the ones I've noticed with video gen, is there's still little subtle problems with like mouth movement, eye movement, and we're very sensitive to that. You know, people's faces and speech again. So like mimicking speech, as you said, like synthetic voice, it's okay in some circumstances, doesn't quite get there when you have these big highs and lows of emotional delivery. And again, with facial stuff, I mean, we do lip synthing, where we replace lips. If you look at the top 50 Netflix shows, the top 50 performing Netflix shows, there's quite a lot of Korean content in there. And that's a really interesting thing, because the Korean content plays well, but what we're finding is the English language audience don't like English dub. And there's a bunch of reasons around that. We're not used to it is the main one. And you know, in foreign territories that have foreign language dubs, so the main ones like France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Latam, Spanish, and so on, Portuguese. And so there are a bunch of dub territories, and those audiences are used to seeing those dubs. And there's a couple of issues with that. One is that the translation has to be done to try to match the lip movement of the original picture and the actor. And again, the audience is kind of tuned into that, but it means the translation is not optimal. It's done to fit the speech. So if you try and do that in English, firstly, it doesn't work really very well. English is not a fast language, as you're probably noticing by looking at the clock and thinking, shit, we're running out of time. And shut up, Rich, get on with it. But yeah, so, you know, it doesn't really fit the cadence, the prosody as it's known, the components of speech, like pace and delivery and so on. And so if you can do lip synth, so you're regenerating the muzzle, the nose and mouth area with Gen AI, that actually really helps with audience engagement, and it lets you do an optimal translation. So now the dub dialogue can be a really good translation, and you just make the lips match perfectly, and that's something we're starting to do now. So it's kind of deep fake, but it's like deep fake for Hollywood, so it's, you know, we're bringing the hacker world into the mainstream.
And speaking of that, I mean, it's really important to remember, like any tool, Gen AI needs to be used responsibly. Recognizing that there's really important discussions taking place in the creative community, how can we inspire others to embrace these opportunities while recognizing and respecting their concerns?
Yeah, and I think we've heard a lot of that already talked about today. So I think for us, the word we always hang on to is about transparency. And so in discussions which we have with our clients is making sure that we are very transparent about the models that we're using. I mean, clients are really interested in what tools we're using at the moment. They're leaning in and they're asking lots of really hard questions. We haven't had this kind of conversation on a lot of other production tools that we use to deliver and stuff. But I think that for us, it's keeping it very transparent, it's keeping it very clear for clients. So how are the models trained? That's kind of one of the key questions which we get asked. How's my data? How's the client's data being used? And we have to obviously make sure that we keep that and it's safe and it's being used in the right way on behalf of our clients. And then the final piece, which is about indemnification and licensing of anything that is then produced out off the back of that is clear and understood of what we're doing. But again, it's not difficult conversations, but they do need to be had, and we do need to be very transparent with clients on how we're doing this.
Yeah, I was at a trade show in Amsterdam for the broadcast industry a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, AI was everywhere, as you would imagine it would be at a trade show now, and everyone's got AI in every tool that you can imagine. But the conversation actually, which was really interesting, that I kind of wasn't expecting, but is definitely on our radar, was about ethically sourced data. And, you know, we've just gone through the actors' strikes, which was absolutely crippling for the film and TV industry. Unfortunately, you know, that's been really difficult to get through. And one of the key components of that was the rights to your likeness. And that means your image and your voice and your movements and mannerisms and all of those things. And, you know, we just saw this come into law in California in the last few weeks with a couple of acts that give both living and actually deceased actors the rights over their likeness. And so ethically sourced data is super important. It's a really big conversation right now, and we have to be able to show to our customers. And, you know, if you're talking to like Disney or Sony Pictures or Paramount, these guys, their whole thing is built on IP. So if they don't want to lose their intellectual property to other, you know, competitors. But secondly, they want to know that what you're doing is ethically sourced in the first place. It's very important for them. And again, their kind of, you know, their talent who are coming into them to make these movies. But also, it's an opportunity, I think, and that's what we shouldn't forget here. This audience, right, is not, mostly I can see a few friends down there, so I know they're media and entertainment, but I'll ignore them for a minute, because they've probably had too many beers to talk to anyway, so I'll catch up. But a lot of you across different verticals, as you know, different industries, construction, retail, pharmaceutical, and you know, one thing that all of us do that isn't always thought about is scanning, 3D scanning. So we're scanning the world around us all the time, and that stuff is not on the internet. Interestingly, there's no scraping the internet for a really big data set of 3D models of the real world. So an example, like on Napoleon, recently there was about 4,000 scans done, and that was the sets, the actors, the props, the costumes. Pretty much every single thing was scanned, and it was done so that you could then pass that into the visual effects process, so if you needed to recreate something, you could do that. And then at the end of that, it's gone. It's deleted, basically. And there's a bunch of like rights reasons why you would do that, but also, if you think about it, you're sitting on a goldmine of training data. Fei Li said recently that she believes, this the godmother of AI, believes that the future of AI is spatial AI. And if that's true, all of this data that a lot of you people out there are creating right now that is not in the public domain is the training data that those spatial AI models are going to rely on. So that stuff, to me, that's a gold mine.
Well, if there's anything that we should take away from this, is that these tools can really help creative teams ideate faster, create more efficiently, and with fewer mundane tasks. So I think that it's important for us to have these conversations with our teams to figure out how these tools can best be employed to work with our own creative processes and our own productions and clients. So I recommend also keep on keeping up, because this stuff changes daily. Join me in thanking Rich Welsh and Ivan Mason.
Thank you. And Tengu.